A real quick shout out to the guest speakers on the Pixel Panel episodes of Retro Reloaded. These are heroes that don't wear capes, but maybe some of them they do. They've been filling in for me doing episodes each week so that Retro Reloaded thrives while my voice problems cease to exist for months. Thank you all for being such a great community. Also, quick shout out to our grandstanding 64-bit legend Zero for being such a great supporter of the show. Mega Man should be jealous of the camaraderie. Then at the 16-bit adventurer tier, we have many longtime warriors, including Marcus Q, Gage, Tetrafolly, and Oriok. Then we can't forget our 8-bit explorer time with longtime supporters such as Wabi Yurt, Ware Coon Warden, Gaming Quarterly, Big Nick Dika. Again, thank you for everything.
Hey there! Welcome to Retro Reloaded. I'm your host Lance, and each week I tackle a retro game shaped by your picks. If you want a chance to choose next week's game or unlock exclusive bonus episodes and polls, join me on Patreon at patreon.com/retroreloaded. There's even a free tier to dip your toes in. Big thanks for all of your love and support. It means the world to me. Now let's hit the start button and reload those retro vibes.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Retro Reloaded Pixel Panel. I'm here on behalf of Lanceroy, performing this particular episode where we will be looking at 8 and 16-bit RPGs that are not on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. I'm Martin, aka the Retro Martin on Discord, and my co-host today is...
Hi, I'm John, aka Xhojn on Discord.
Welcome John, and I'm happy to have you here chatting all things gaming with me, of course. So, as I mentioned already, we're going to be speaking about 8 and 16-bit RPGs that are not on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, this isn't to say that the SNES wasn't a fantastic console with a lot of great RPGs. We know it did. However, those tend to be the ones that get talked about quite a lot. So we thought what we'd do here is just chat about some that are either lesser known or not talked about quite so much, just to allow our listeners to maybe learn about a few games or remind themselves of some absolute gems that they may have forgotten about. So, yeah, that's basically what we're here to talk about.
One point I would like to bring up, though, is that for those of us in PAL territories, got forgotten because a bunch of things like, I don't know, Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, Earthbound, they never made it to our territories, and we had to get them after the fact via re-releases on other consoles, ports to like the DS or whatever, or the Virtual Console.
I think forgotten is definitely a very kind way to put it. There were an awful lot of RPGs that we didn't get on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, so we definitely were very lost on that particular front. However, I will say that Sega definitely had our backs in an awful lot of ways, and I'm sure that an awful lot of what we bring up will be Sega related.
Not only.
What we'll do is we'll just do a little bit of back and forth on various series that we've gone over and talk about some random games here and there, and we'll go from there. Is there anything you need to bring up before we start properly, John?
Well, I paused them for a moment because I remembered Lanceroy's words of, don't swear in the first 10 minutes. So don't swear the first 10 minutes.
Apparently the reason for this is it helps the algorithm. I don't know.
Oh, hell the algorithm.
Yeah, all hell the algorithm. Everyone bow down now. So yeah, getting into it then. I thought the first series we talk about is one that is quite commonly known, but doesn't seem to get talked about in quite the same arena as some of its contemporaries for a lot of people, and that is Shining Force, which I know you've played quite a few of the games, John. I've played an awful lot of the series, and one of my favorite games of all time is Shining Force 3, but we're not going to talk about that one because that's on a 32-bit console on the Saturn, so we'll have to leave that for another time. But certainly there were quite a few games before that on various consoles. I first became aware of the series via Sega XS magazine, which had a huge guide for Shining Force where it basically laid all the maps out and had all the characters, and that was my first real entry to the series. So I read that many times, and I wouldn't actually get to play the game for about 6 or 7 years after that. But when I got to it, it was everything I wanted it to be. And I fell in love with it instantly. And then I was able to click with the rest of the series, going on to stuff like Shining Force 2, Shining in the Darkness, and then much later onto the Game Gear games, as well as the Mega CD game, which was obviously a remake of 2 of the Game Gear ones. So it's quite a big series in and of itself. John, what was your introduction to the Shining series?
Sonic the Comic.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about because I remember it well as well. Do you want to tell our listeners exactly what you're talking about?
For those who didn't grow up in the UK, Sonic the Comic was a very popular comic based on Sonic the Hedgehog that ran from, I think it was 94 through to 2000. Anyway, so they have the main strips were always Sonic the Comic, Sonic the Hedgehog, but they would also have like the Sega superstars. So they would have like Wonder Boy, Streets of Rage, Golden Axe, but also we got only one series, but of Shine Force. I think it was for Shine Force 2 why they included it, because I think that was about to come out.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think it was quite a few issues in when they did that one, and it took parts of the story from Shining Force 2, but was very much its own thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's because as they had, I think gave it 6 issues maybe, and that's 5 to 7 pages. So they probably had to, and it was it was a comic aimed at kids, so they probably had to kind of dumb it down quite a lot and be like, we can't front load of lore. This has to be entertaining. So, but yeah, and who knows? We may eventually get a re-release of this. Who knows? Because when they did the Rocket Knight Adventures collection last year, was it? Or was it early this year? Last year.
Yeah, I think it was last year it came out. Rocket Knight Adventures Resparked.
That's it. And they included with that the one comic that was done for Sonic the Comic based on, the second Rocket Knight game. So
yes,
who knows?
I remember it well. And I have a copy of Respark physically on the shelf that I can see from my chair here. I did enjoy that Sparkster strip, but certainly it is worth noting with Sonic the Comic that some of the artists were actually veteran artists from other publications such as Judge Dredd. So quite a lot of violence and blood did actually make its way into what was a kid's comic, which probably goes to say quite a lot about us as individuals grown up.
I mean, look at Streets of Rage. Yeah, that it's shocking how that came out when it did. They would not get away with that now, and I love them for it.
Oh, absolutely. But hey, we're not here to talk about Sonic the Comic. Maybe that will make up another radio show at some point for someone else. But we're here to obviously talk about Shining Force. So we've obviously had the strip in Sonic the Comic, which was released around Europe because it was translated into several other languages as well. And then obviously the magazines, which showed it all off. So what was the first game you actually played in the series?
The first game I actually properly played was Shining in the Darkness earlier this year. So that is the first game in the series that I believe, even though it's probably not the one that people know the best.
Yeah, so in terms of timeline, as loose as the timeline is, it's set quite a little bit later, but it was the first Shining series game on the Mega Drive, and unlike the Shining Force games, it is of course a first-person dungeon crawler, a little bit more akin to the original Phantasy Star in the way its dungeons worked. But yeah, it's had some lovely artwork from Yoshitaka Tamaki, who did a lot of the artwork for the early series, and unfortunately passed away 1 or 2 years ago, unfortunately. But yeah, really strong game to start with in the series. And then I think a year or two later, they then brought out Shining Force, which changed the entire genre into a strategy RPG. Have you played Shining Force at all, John?
No, I mean, I wanted to play. I will play it. I've got it on my Mega Drive Mini. So I will be one that I will get to, because I want to play through the rest of the series, but I decided to play it in the release order.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So I've played quite a lot of Shining Force. I've completed it several times on various platforms. I don't own an original Mega Drive physical copy, but I've had it on various collections over the years. And I do have a physical copy of the Game Boy Advance remake of it as well, which was really, really good. but I won't go into that because that's not really an 8 or 16-bit version. But yeah, it's got a really, really strong cast in it. Some really lovely locales. It does allow you to do a little bit of town mooching as well, which is really, really nice because a lot of strategy RPGs generally tend to jump from battle to battle to battle, and this one has a little bit of exploration in between to find hidden characters. So there's an awful lot of secret characters that you can miss. There's even one straight up before the first battle if you teleport out, or you can get him afterwards. So, you know, as early as that, there's quite a lot of secrets in it. So it's definitely a worthy game. And then that was followed up a year or two later with Shining Force 2, which obviously, going on what you said before, you've not played it yet. It basically just bumped everything up to 11. Again, really stellar cast, some absolutely fantastic locales. The graphics were improved quite a lot as well. Not that they were any slouch on the original game. And I believe at that point, Motoaki Takanouchi took over on composing duties, who was quite well known for doing Evo Search for Eden on the SNES, which is, funny enough, quite a good little RPG.
But not what we're here to talk about.
Not what we're here to talk about, no. And he also did Duel Master on the Mega Drive, which quite a few people will probably know. So yeah, you can definitely hear quite a lot of the riffs very similar between those two games, Duel Master and Shining Force 2. But while all this was going on, there were also 3 games made for the Game Gear as well, which were Shining Force Gaiden 1, 2, and 3. With Gaiden, however you want to pronounce it, basically meaning sort of side story. And these games were, the first 2 games were set very much as a sequel to Shining Force 1, being set like 10, 20 years later, with a lot of the characters much, much older, and had their own plot that, you know, was sort of throwaway. It didn't really change anything for the entire series, but it was really, really good fun on the Game Gear. Only one of them got translated, which became the Sword of Hajil, or Haya, however you want to pronounce it. And then both of those games actually got remade for the Mega CD as Shining Force CD, which I know you've got access to play, but I'm assuming you've not played, John?
No, so I've got a physical of it, so but I haven't tried it yet because I want to play it in the right order, as in, like, I should play it when the right context of the series. So I've got a Mega CD, I've got the game, I've also got it on my Mega Drive Mini 2, so I've got ways to play it.
Yeah, I have a physical Japanese copy of it on the Mega CD, as well as on the Mini 2. I did borrow it back in the early 2000s from a friend of mine, a PAL version, which is how I got introduced to it, because I'd not heard of it back then, despite obviously playing a Mega CD quite a fair bit. But it basically puts the first 2 Gaiden games together and adds in a couple of extra storylines after as well. So it's quite a nice complete package. And they've obviously bumped up the graphics quite a lot, so they match more Shining Force 1 style, because obviously it's meant as a sequel to that. So then there was the 3rd game, which is the one that a lot of people lament that didn't actually get translated and released in the West, and that was Shining Force Gaiden Final Conflict. Now, this was basically a sort of more direct sequel to Shining Force 1, where you actually play the son of one of the heroes, probably about 16, 17 years later. And the reason it's so important, and a lot of people are really disappointed it didn't get translated, is because it actually directly affects Shining Force 2 as well. A lot of the things that crop up in Shining Force 2 came about because of events in Shining Force Gaiden Final Conflict. So it's quite an important bridge for the storyline between the first and the second games that shows they are actually a cohesive overall storyline rather than just 2 separate adventures. I have completed it. It's an absolutely fantastic game with some lovely little 8-bit graphics on the Game Gear. I've got a reproduction version of it that allows it to run on a Master System as well, which is quite nice rather than having to stare at a small Game Gear screen. But it has been translated by Shining Force Central, which obviously makes it infinitely more playable for people who speak English, and allows them to follow the storyline. But I definitely recommend playing it once you've completed Shining Force 1 and maybe Shining Force CD before you go into 2. But it doesn't matter if you play it afterwards. But certainly, absolutely fantastic series all round between all those games. They're much more accessible to younger players because they don't have permanent death like the Fire Emblem series did back in the day. and the artwork is just absolutely timeless. So Shining Force is definitely a series that a lot of people, I think, need to get into, over some of the other RPGs that we'll probably be talking about, because it's just so seminal to the Mega Drive and, notwithstanding the Game Gear and the Mega CD as well. So moving on from Shining Force then, another series that we actually wanted to chat about was Phantasy Star. So do you want to take us away with Phantasy Star, John?
So with Phantasy Star, sadly, this did not get a strip in Sonic the Comic, which boggled my mind, thinking back. But this started life on the Master System. And the game, it blends like fantasy and sci-fi, because it's set, even though it's set on an alien planet and there's several planets that you end up visiting, but you have like laser swords and guns and things like that. But there's also a lot of fantasy tropes, like there's castles, there's like magic, and there's also like fantasy creatures as well. So I think they were trying to blend the two genres together. And the first game is a dungeon crawler. So have you ever played games like Eye of the Beholder? So it's when you're in the overworld, you have a kind of top-down perspective that like moving your character around. If you go into a random combat, then it is turn-based RPG. But then when you go into a dungeon, then you have a first-person view, and then as you go along, then you can again. There's no mini-map, by the way. They expected you to draw your own, and actually have to keep track that way of where you're going. But then you can get into fights within there, within the dungeons, and that would then go into a turn-based game. Then when it got to the Mega Drive and we had Phantasy Star 2, then that ditched the first-person style dungeons and went to a more traditional kind of top-down. And then we had Phantasy Star 3, Phantasy Star 4. There were 2 Game Gear games, one of which was more like a kind of visual novel style game, but then called Phantasy Star Adventure. But then there's also Phantasy Star Gaiden. I haven't played that one, but I think that's meant to be more of a traditional kind of RPG, but shorter, I believe.
Yeah. Carry on, John.
Yeah, so and that's all there was for many years until we're not going to cover it, but then it was brought back to life via the Dreamcast with Phantasy Star Online. But that was a different beast, because not to kind of like do spoilers, but the Phantasy Star story does get wrapped up with 4. So, but fans have always been clamoring for another like entry, like Phantasy Star 5. We did get on the DS Phantasy Star 0, but that's more of a 0 to Phantasy Star Online and not Phantasy Star 0 to the main series, the original series. But we're getting into the weeds with that. So this series probably might be the one that, alongside Shining Force, might be the most well-known on the Sega side. It's been pretty much in every compilation that Sega have ever done. And funny enough, the first way I got to play this series was via the GBA port, which had 1, 2, and 3 on the cart. But then I played 4 via the Mega Drive collection on Steam. So I've never actually owned these games physically, because I did the GBA cart via emulation and then used the Steam port to play 4. One thing I will note is that if you have the Mega Drive Mini 2, they did do a port of Phantasy Star 2, but they did also rebalance it, because the original was horribly unfair, in my opinion. Like, I spent ages grinding to get through like part of the game, and then went straight after to the next world, and I was like getting my ass handed to me straight away. So it was like, I felt it was a bit BS myself. But what's your experience with the original games, Martin?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Phantasy Star 2 being a little bit on the overly difficult side. It's the only one I've not actually completed, because I just find the beginning to be so grossly unfair to your time. But my first experience with it would actually have been Phantasy Star Online on the Dreamcast. I'd not heard of the series at all before that, back in the 90s. Or the 80s, despite obviously playing a Master System and a Mega Drive quite a lot. I just wasn't in a lot of RPG circles with games. So I think the only RPG I played before Final Fantasy VII was Wonder Boy 3 The Dragon's Trap, amusingly enough. So when I discovered PSO, I sort of got into emulation a little bit around then, and I actually discovered the first 4 Phantasy Star games. I've completed 1, 3, and 4, although I've only done one of the routes for 3. So the way that 3 worked was there was like a short few-hour RPG before you would choose who to marry, and then it would spout off onto another several-hour RPG, and then each of those strands would also have their own branch off. So you'd end up with 4 endings after going through 3 separate stories. And one of those endings, fans have sort of managed to just about put together, actually connects the 4 games much better than the other ones would have done. But it's certainly it's considered the weakest of the 4 games because I'll be honest with you, the music is utterly trash in Phantasy Star 3. It's not good at all. It really doesn't work with the Mega Drive Yamaha in any way, shape, or form. It's dire to listen to. But the branching romance system and the different routes through it actually give the game quite a lot of replayability, and it does have quite a few good characters on it. But obviously the jewel in the crown is Phantasy Star 4 because it has some absolutely gorgeous art sort of cutaway scenes which look like you're playing an anime almost when you're going through the cutscenes. It really pushes the Mega Drive palette to its absolute limits, and the game itself is really, really good fun. And I more recently was able to complete Phantasy Star 1 via the Switch Sega Ages port. I tried to play it several times before on various collections and could just never really complete it. But obviously the quality of life improvements and the mini-map that would pan out for you made it a lot easier on the Switch. But so the other thing that makes Phantasy Star 1 quite important is that it came out around the same time as Final Fantasy did, so both released within a month of each other in 1987. And the lead of Phantasy Star is Alice, who would basically have been one of the very first, if not the first, female RPG lead back then in any way, shape, or form. So she's quite important from that particular perspective. So both are very, very seminal RPGs in their particular genre. Obviously, Final Fantasy taking more of the classic fantasy route, and Phantasy Star going on the sci-fi route. So yeah, absolutely. And I have actually played Phantasy Star Adventure and Phantasy Star Gaiden. Gaiden is more of like a normal, just top-down RPG. And as you said, Adventure is more of a visual novel style. There were actually several other visual novels that I believe were sequels to Phantasy Star 2, which follow all the characters that came out on. They were on a sort of collection. So if I remember rightly, they were on the Game Gear as like separate little mini adventures that you could get from like a download kiosk or something like that. But then what they did was on Game no Kanzame Volume 1 and 2 on the Mega CD, they'd actually included some of those text adventures in there as like little sets. There was like 6 on each one. And then they actually released a cut down version of the Game no Kanzame games on the Mega Drive afterwards, but they cut the text adventures, unfortunately. But yeah, if you play those on the Mega CD, those text adventures are complete. And I believe they've actually been translated now as well. Which is quite good.
Yeah,
so
those have fan English translations,
yes.
Which you can get online from like romhacking.org. Otherwise, there's also, if you are PAL like us, is also being converted to PAL, which you can download from archive.org.
There you go. Well, that's why it's important to have fans who can do these things, because it makes it accessible to more people. Obviously, the drive is still going to try and make things available in more than just English, but you know, slowly we'll get there, and everyone can play these games. So there's quite a lot of 8 and 16-bit Phantasy Star games if you take all of those in together. So again, it's quite a big series, and as it was one of the first, if again not the first, RPG that blended sci-fi fully with fantasy, that's what makes it so important. And there's a lot of people who have very fond memories of the Phantasy Star series. So we're going to move on now to the next series, which is one that isn't wholly RPG, but it's got quite a few RPGs in it. And again, I think it's the last one that's going to be very well known to a lot of people, especially with a recent collection coming out, and that's going to be the Wonder Boy series. Now, my first encounter with Wonder Boy was, amusingly enough, like John with Shining Force, through Sonic the Comic. because there was a couple of strips in that which followed Wonder Boy and Monster World on the Mega Drive. So the protagonist from that, Xhojn. And that was my first encounter with it. And actually, no, that's a lie. My first encounter with it was actually Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap, which I played via my cousins, and the original Wonder Boy on the Commodore, which was more of a platformer. So I'm not going to really dwell on that one. And then I moved on to the Sonic the Comic, and obviously I recognized the Wonder Boy name, but didn't realize it was a different character. I thought it was just Sonic the Comic taking some artistic license. So, but there have been a few RPGs in the series. One that I will talk about quite a bit more in a minute, which was Wonder Boy in Monsterland, which was actually an arcade RPG, which is something you don't really see very often. The aforementioned Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap, which was sort of an RPG crossed with a Metroidvania. And then you had Wonder Boy in Monster World, which was on the Mega Drive, and PAL Regions actually got a Master System port of that as well, as a one-off, so that was a PAL exclusive. And then obviously there was a sort of lesser RPG, but still in that realm, with Monster World 4 on the Mega Drive, which was originally Japanese only until more recently. So there's quite a few games in there that are actual RPGs, and I'll talk about them a little bit more later. But what was your first experience with Wonder Boy, John?
Sonic the Comic.
Noticing a theme here.
Yes, but gameplay-wise, okay, so for those who aren't familiar, Wonder Boy started off as more of an arcade game. So that would be my first experience was a couple of years ago, Wonder Boy on the Master System. But the first RPG was Dragon's Trap, again, for the Master System. I tried it via a EverDrive, a flash cartridge for the Mega Drive, that also lets you play Master System games. But after playing it for a bit, I just went straight on eBay and bought it because I was enjoying it that much. I thought it was such a fantastic game that I had to have it physically. And it sits on my shelf now.
It is a fantastic game, and it's probably my favourite Master System game. And while I know this is audio only, I'm actually wearing my Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap t-shirt as we speak, which was complete happenstance. And it just happens to be the fact that it's the 40th anniversary of the Sega Mark III releasing today as we record. And I thought, I'll wear my Master System related t-shirt. So you can tell I obviously like the series as a result, as we've gone over it quite a few times, where I've probably overindulged in my my knowledge or love of it whenever we've been chatting. But have you ever played Wonder Boy in Monsterland on the Master System or the arcade at all?
In Monsterland, so I'm trying to actually remember which one that was, because some of the titles do get very confusing.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, so is that the one where he looks more like a knight?
Yeah, so you start out basically looking like you're basically a blonde chap who's wearing a diaper or a nappy if you're from our region, and carrying a sword, and that's literally it at the start.
No, I'm thinking maybe Monster World then, or is that like...
Yeah, Monster World's where you play Xhojn, who's got blue hair and is wearing the basically knight's armor. Effectively.
Yeah, that's like the three I know the best are Dragon's Trap, that one, and the original Monster Boy, Wonder Boy, whatever it's called.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, basically the series started in the mid 80s. I think it was 86. The original Wonder Boy came out in the arcades, and that was a side-scrolling platformer where you basically throw axes and collect fruit to keep your food meter up, or your hunger meter up, while trying to rescue your girlfriend. So not RPG in any way, shape, or form, but West One, however you want to pronounce it, have basically changed the way the games work every single time. And what they did was, I think in 1987, they released Wonder Boy in Monsterland, which was an arcade RPG. So it's not super short. It's still going to take you a good hour to complete, but basically you're on a timer, which slowly counts that. Well, I say slowly, it's bloody quick, but it goes very, very fast, counting down, and you've got to get through the levels, collecting loot and buying equipment in various shops. And there are certain secrets dotted throughout, which allow you to get more powerful weapons. And effectively, you've got to get to the end before you run out of like the 2 lives that you basically have. And I don't think you can really get the opportunity to get another one. So it's one of those games where you have to get really good at, because some of the platforming is utterly brutal. to complete. But again, it shows that an arcade RPG is perfectly possible, and it was probably the very first arcade RPG. And then a Master System port came a little bit later, which had an extra level shoved in just to make it a little bit more unique. But where Wonder Boy in Monsterland becomes quite important, now a lot of people, going off on a bit of tangent here, a lot of people will know Castlevania Symphony of the Night, where the very beginning of it, you're playing as Richter, and you go off and defeat Dracula, and then the game starts proper after that, where you play as Alucard. And the game that came before it, Rondo of Blood, Dracula X, whatever you want to call it, depending on your region, that is actually the final battle in that you play at the start of Symphony of the Night. So the two games crossed over in that particular regard. Now, Wonder Boy actually did that 10 years beforehand. So the very last dungeon in Wonder Boy Monsterland has a cut down version of it playing at the very start of Dragon's Trap. So the very beginning of Dragon's Trap is actually the final dungeon of Monsterland again, and you're fighting the same final boss again as the very first boss in Dragon's Trap. And it's even got a remix of the same music by Shinichi Sakamoto, which is a very popular theme that gets throughout the series. I wasn't sure if you were aware of that at all, John?
Yeah, so I wasn't sure where it came from, but I think I remember hearing that the start of the game was the end of a different game. But I guess it's like poetry,
Yeah,
right?
So now you know. So so basically the end of Monsterland is the beginning of Dragon's Trap. So they've obviously just added to it. So then moving on to Dragon's Trap, which I know you have played, that's a lot more of a Metroidvania crossed with an RPG, where basically the titular Wonder Boy, who is the same one from Monsterland, funnily enough, because each game is almost a different character, gets cursed by the Mecha Dragon and gets turned into a dragon / lizard, whatever you want to call it. And you have to go through to reclaim your human form. And in so doing, you actually encounter other forms such as a mouse, lion, and a hawk, and a piranha. And basically you use the different abilities of each to get through the different parts of the game. But you basically have a little hub world in the middle, and you basically go out from there to complete all the different dungeons and beat all these different dragons themed on like a mummy and a pirate and all this, until you obviously beat the zombie dragon at the end and get I think it's called the Southern Cross or something like that. And that gives you your human form back. But obviously that was my original RPG that I played, because my cousins had a cartridge of it on the Master System. So I used to play that an awful lot. So it is my favorite Master System game, and it is just fantastic. Then the series moved on to there was actually another game before Dragon's Trap called Wonder Boy in Monster Lair, where you played another two characters, and that was more of a side-scrolling shoot 'em up. But the home version came after Dragon's Trap, which is what led to a lot of the confusion with the numbering, because America didn't actually get a home port of Wonder Boy in Monster Lair. So that should have been the third game, but because it didn't come home in America, they made Dragon's Trap the third game. So there's your confusion right there.
It's like Final Fantasy all over again.
Oh, absolutely. Final Fantasy 3 is 6, and 6 is 3, and oh my lord. So from there, we then moved on to the one that you played quite a fair bit, Wonder Boy in Monster World, which was the first one on the Mega Drive. And that was the one that the two Sonic the Comic strips were based on, where you play as Shion. Again, that one follows a similar vein to the Dragon's Trap, where it's more action RPG and a little bit of Metroidvania in it. But you don't change forms. All you do is you get different equipment that allows you to swim or go small and stuff like that. And again, it's a really, really fantastic game with a lot of great locales and characters. Although it appears simplistic, it really isn't. And if I may point out, just to annoy all the Nintendo lovers, there was an ocarina in it, which you got to use before Zelda Link to the Past. So have it, Zelda fans. Because we like throwing a bit of shade at Nintendo occasionally.
But we do love the Nintendo as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So that then, as I mentioned earlier, got a port to the Master System in PAL regions only, which came with a password system, I believe. Now, the weird thing with Wonder Boy Monster World is in Japan, if you died, it just took you straight back to your last in. Whereas with the Western version, you had to basically reload the save at the last in. So it just led to a little bit more effort to get back into the game on a death. And also, they made the last boss harder by adding a conveyor belt, which wasn't present in the Japanese version, making what was already quite a difficult boss just absolutely ridiculously tough. And it's probably the one bit that sours the game in my experience, because the rest of it is absolutely phenomenal. It's hard, but it's manageable. And then you get to that final boss, and it's just, oh. Have you ever completed it?
So the only game I've completed in the series is Dragon's Trap, but it doesn't surprise me they might do something like that, because I'm guessing because of the rental market, where they were like, no, you will not beat this in a weekend. You will have to keep coming back.
Yeah. Same situation with Streets of Rage 3, which we will forever be sore about. Yeah. So then, obviously, the only other one that was part of this main series back then was Monster World 4, which originally was only released in Japan. And that, again, had a female protagonist for the first time in the series, outside of the Player 2 character in Monster Lair, Princess Purapuril. But because she was two-player, she wasn't really the main lead. So Monster World 4 focused solely on Asher and had more of an Arabian theme. And again, was very much not equipment based, but you get like a little helper called Pepelagoo, who could do various things in various worlds, depending on how much you'd fed him, and you used him to traverse around the different levels. But again, it really pushed the Mega Drive in terms of color. And the music was absolutely fantastic, and it was a really, really great game. And we eventually would get it on the Wii Virtual Console before some more traditional collections included it in it. And more recently, just like Wonder Boy the Dragon's Trap, we've had a remake of it on more modern consoles, which is an absolutely fantastic remake. I definitely urge people to go and try it. But we're not here to talk about that, so I just thought I'd throw it out there. Do you have any other thoughts you want to mention about Wonder Boy before we move on?
I think the fact that Dragon's Trap, if you don't really want to go back and play like a Master System game, has been remade and is available on modern consoles and PC, and it's done by the same company who've made most recently Shinobi Art of Vengeance, but before that Streets of Rage 4. So, and I haven't played the remake. It's one I do intend to at some point, but I think I want to leave a bit more time between playing the Master System one and then playing the remake. But the art looks fantastic from what I've seen.
The remake, I've got it on the PlayStation 4 and the Switch, and it looks and sounds phenomenal. And I would definitely urge people to buy it purely because you can change between the original graphics and the original sound, as well as the remake sound graphics at will at a push of a button. There's literally a button for the graphics and a button for the sound that you can just push at will. So you can basically mix and match. So new art with old sound, or old art with new sound, or whatever. So it's definitely a very complete package. And I think apart from a couple of bits that have been changed, it's pretty much faithful to the original game. So even if you can't play the original, the remake is absolutely worth it, bar none, in my opinion. So that's a recommendation to everyone, including yourself, John, when you've had enough time from playing the Dragon's Trap originally. So moving on from some of the more popularly known series, I believe you wanted to go over a couple of Game Gear games if you wanted to talk about those next.
Yes, moving on to the Game Gear. Don't worry, we're not only just going to talk about Sega stuff. So the two I want to talk about, I'm putting them together because these are the two Game Gear games I wanted to talk about, but I played them both within the last year. So the last year I played a game called Defenders of Oasis. And initially when I first had the title, I wondered, is this somehow related to the game Beyond Oasis, which is the American name for the story of Thor, which was released on the Mega Drive, made by Agent, aka Yuzo Koshiro's company. It is in no way related to that game. Defenders of Oasis is a traditional RPG, but it's like set in like a very kind of Arabian kind of setting. So it's so it's not a very long game per se. I think for the Game Gear, it's like more than like I think it has a great length for that handheld console. You only get like 4 party members, one of which is a genie. So it's like, again, really going in on the Arabian theme. All the monsters and like the locations and everything. It's like it's kind of like, Aladdin or Alibaba or something like that. I really enjoyed it because of that kind of Arabian style to the game. Like I'm so used to more either Western or kind of Asian kind of mythologies. It was quite refreshing to have that kind of setting instead in like an RPG. I mean, I also loved watching Aladdin growing up, but so it was released in, like, funny enough, I saw a copy of it in my local CEX a couple of days ago. I didn't pick it up because I don't own a Game Gear, but it's one that I would easily recommend. So if you ever heard of Defenders of Oasis?
I have played it very briefly. I do have a Game Gear, but I don't have a copy of the game. But I believe it was put out on the 3DS eShop, and I downloaded it on that, which is how I got to play it. I only played it for maybe about 10, 15 minutes, just long enough to see what it was like and determine, it seems all right, and I would probably play it properly when I do get around to playing it. But not enough to really know an awful lot about it. But as soon as you started talking about the Arabian theme, I was like, oh yes, I have played that.
Yeah, it doesn't really do anything new or different. It's just a very serviceable RPG for a handheld console. And then the next game is one that probably a lot of people, I would assume, have not played and may not even heard of because it was a Japanese exclusive, and that is Sylvan Tale. So this isn't a turn-based RPG. This is more in the vein of it's more like a Zelda kind of style game. There's no leveling up. You just find items and new abilities so that you can actually progress in the world. Also look at Story of Thought or / Beyond Oasis. It's received a fan translation, so you can play it in English. You'll need that to be able to know where you need to go next. And again, I played this a couple of months ago, and it's another one I really enjoyed. It's, again, not one that is too long, but for being the Game Gear, I think it's more than long enough. I think it has some great music and some great visuals, and it lets you save anywhere. So again, because you're on the go, you need to stop at a moment's notice. And there's 3 different kind of areas when I say 3 different areas, like there's dungeons within those areas, but 3 different parts of the game to explore. And it's one that I remember reading about on the internet, and I was like, oh, I should play this at some point. Then I knuckled down, no, I need another Game Gear game to play. I am going to play this. I took a look. You can find repros of it on the internet, but they weren't cheap either. Like, they were expensive as well. So I'm not sure if this is not being mass produced, but I believe also if you're into the Game Gear to Master System repro, so this is where someone has converted a Game Gear game to play on a Master System, and then it's being released physically. I think you can also grab it that way as well. But it's one I would, if you enjoy kind of the action RPG kind of games, like a Zelda, then it's an easy recommendation. Again, is this one you've heard of, Martin?
Again, I've heard of it, and I played it incredibly briefly, probably a lot less than Defenders of Oasis, so I was aware of it. I've tried the fan translation on an EverDrive on my actual Game Gear, just to see what it was about. And again, determined it looked decent enough, so at some point I will sit down and play it. But that's a good recommendation, if any. I think you completed it a month or 2 ago, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So I was actually, because I don't have a Game Gear, I was playing this via Retro Arch on my phone. So I was doing the handheld experience, but in a more modern way. The only thing I will say is controlling it via phone, via touchscreen, was a pain in the butt at times, because trying to do the D-pad, like, I would not go the direction I wanted to go. And if you're fighting in real time, like, that really hampered me in some ways. Like, I would get hit because I'm going like, no, I meant that way, but the phone, like, moving my thumb over, wasn't registering how I wanted it to register on which button.
Yeah, I hate touch screens. I can't stand using my phone for emulation. I mean, I do, and I have sometimes used a Bluetooth controller instead. just so I don't have to use god-awful touchscreen and controls. But yeah, they certainly don't work for action games. They're probably all right from visual novels and turn-based RPGs, but yeah, action games, just no. So
Yeah, a lot more difficult.
yeah, but there's quite a few RPGs on the Game Gear, and obviously, like a lot of these sort of systems, a lot of them remain Japan only. But again, it's a system that would surprise you. There's quite a few strategy RPGs on there as well. A few of which I can't remember the names of, that I was able to download on like the 3DS eShop, which were quite good. But one of the main ones, which is a series that I know we'll talk about in a minute on the Mega CD, but a spin-off from that was Luna Sanposuru Gakuen, which stands for like Luna Walking School, and that's a spin-off from the main Luna series. It doesn't really tie in with the two main Luna games. It's very much a spin-off, but the Game Gear game has again had a fan translation, which has made it infinitely more accessible to people. And as you mentioned with Silver Tail, I actually have next to me on the chair a Game Gear to Master System conversion with the fan translation, so I can play it on a Master System. The game has also had a remake for the Saturn, which hasn't been fan translated, but is in the process of being so. And then hopefully that one will be quite more accessible, because I actually do own a Japanese copy of that, just because I got quite heavily into the Luna series after you, even though I was aware of it and kept wanting to play it, you finally were able to introduce me to it properly through some work that you've been doing, John. So that's certainly a great game on the Game Gear. And then swinging it round a little bit to a series that more people are familiar with, and you did get mentioned very briefly earlier, is Golden Axe. There were actually two 8-bit RPGs for the Golden Axe series. You had Golden Axe Warrior on the Master System, which is one I didn't play back in the day, but was on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 Mega Drive collection as like an optional extra. And that one is a traditional Zelda 1 style RPG where it's top down, and it's more action oriented, but with you just literally swinging your sword on the screen, and it never sort of cuts away to a battling system or anything like that. That one's quite good to play. I haven't played loads of it, but it's one I do want to go through. And the one that I did play back in the day, which again is going back to the Game Gear, was Axe Battler, which the best way I can describe this for people who don't know it is it's very much a Zelda 2 clone. So the main game is sort of top down, walking through the world and shopping and all the rest of it. But when you go into a dungeon, it becomes a side scroller, where you've got a more normal size sprite for Axe Battler, and it's an action RPG in that vein. And again, it's really, really tough. But a game like that on the Game Gear was perfect. It's not too long. It's very easy to sort of pick up and get used to, and it's a really enjoyable game. So those are two I'd certainly recommend people try out, especially if you're a fan of the Golden Axe franchise as well, because obviously the beat 'em ups are quite well regarded on the Mega Drive and the arcades especially. Have you ever had any experience with any of those games or the Game Gear Luna at all, John?
Out of the three that you've said, I've only played Golden Axe Warrior on the Master System via an emulator, because I remember reading about it, and yeah, I knew Golden Axe from the Mega Drive, but it also did sound very interesting because I played Zelda 1 via, again, an emulator, and yeah, it is very, very similar, but I thought that the game also did its own thing like really well. I liked the graphics. I like the combat. It did get a bit hard at times, so I may have used some save states to get through it, but otherwise it's one that I would also recommend for people to try out. But I've heard of like Axe Battler, and I've heard of the Luna Walking School, and was curious how that technically relates to the Luna series. I need to look more into it. But I feel like the Game Gear, Sega really to bring these games back is what I'm trying to say. I know that Luna is a different license holder, but I feel like some of these games need to have a better re-release than as an optional extra on a compilation that was put out on one console. You know, they need to do like proper, like how we've had the Mega Drive compilations. They should do a Game Gear compilation or a Master System compilation and release those on like modern platforms as well. But
Yeah, I think putting some of the games onto the 3DS was probably a good first step, but they don't seem to have capitalized on that. And apart from releasing the Game Gear Micros a year or two ago, which did actually have some of the Shining Force games on, there's been nothing else on the Game Gear front. I mean, all we get is re-releases of the Sonic Game Gear games, which aren't even the best versions of the games.
And over again.
Yeah, I know. But still, we digress. But the Game Gear definitely seems to be a bit of an unsung hero when it comes to RPGs. So what we're trying to say is get one and get some RPGs for it, because you won't be disappointed.
Or if you have a flash cartridge for a Master System or a Mega Drive, you can get Game Gear to Master System conversions to play.
Absolutely. So there's definitely ways to play them these days. You just obviously have to seek them out. But yeah, certainly a fantastic little handheld back in 1992, I think it came out originally. So yeah. Next that we wanted to move on to then, I thought, seeing as we've just spoken about Luna, it might be a good idea for us to go over the main games on the Mega CD, which was obviously their original incarnation before the more popular PlayStation versions in the West, and obviously the Saturn versions in Japan before that were released. Now, I'd love to take the lead on this one, but I know you've had an awful lot of love and work poured into this series with some of your fan work, John. So I'll let you fire away on this one to start with.
Yeah, considering also you've actually played both of them, and I've still only played the first one. So, but okay. To provide a bit of context, so I never had a Mega CD growing up, and then 4 or 5 years ago, getting into seeing videos on YouTube of people talking about the console, and then thinking, oh, it'd be interesting to try the games, because I've heard of Sonic CD. Everyone's heard of Sonic CD, and I'd tried emulating, and I beat Snatcher via an emulator on my laptop. But then I was like, okay, what other games are there? And then I looked at some top 10 lists, and Luna would always be on that. Oh, that's really cool. Did some digging, and it was a Japanese and US exclusive. It never came out in PAL territories, and I was like, oh, okay. But then I found places that had PAL repros. I was like, oh, cool. So then I got my Mega CD thanks to a Christmas bonus, and then ordered the first Luna. There was only ever the first Luna, not the second. Tried it, and the game just wouldn't work properly. And I was like, oh, okay. Done some more digging. Then I found another repro, somebody else doing a repro, which did. For those who are unaware, back in the day, if you had PAL, then you were locked to 50 hertz for the speed, whereas US and Japan was 60 hertz. But that meant that if you make a game like a PAL conversion, that can lead to a issue with the sync of the audio and the video. So, in other words, the cutscenes for the Luna games would go on longer than the audio would. So you would have people talking, and their scene would, not have started yet because of such issue with the timing. So the people who made these conversions hadn't actually done that. I believe the one that didn't work for me actually had done the work, but I couldn't get the game to actually boot properly. So I was like, well, okay. And then when I opened the disc up via a computer to look more into it, it was an absolute mess. If I would try and use a program to go through the different audio tracks, a bunch of them were just completely corrupted. It was a very bad burn by the looks of it. So then I decided, because also the second game just wasn't available, that I would undertake this myself. And that began the madness that is my work on the PAL conversions, which I won't get into here. But in other words, I learned how to use a free program called Audacity to change the tempo of the tracks that were tied to cutscenes. So if it was just the background music for a theme within a fight, or when you're on the overworld, I didn't touch that. But if somebody would be talking, then it would actually then be in sync with the cutscene that now was slowed down because of the 50 hertz. And then, yeah, I put that up, and I have now got a repro that actually is of my work. With Luna 2, aka Luna Eternal Blue, that was a bit more difficult because it did not have CD audio tracks. That was all PCM audio, but there was a very clever driver that made it, seem like it was CD audio. And I had to get someone, like I tried for 2 years to do it myself. I pulled a lot of blood, sweat and tears, but then I found like an absolute like programming genius who just took a very quick look at the audio driver. I was like, oh yeah, here you go, and told me 2 locations that I had to look at to change the speed. And then I could play around with it. And suddenly we have a PAL, conversion that will play the audio at the correct speed. And I have a repro of that. And that will be the next RPG I play after I beat the current one. But yes, sorry, that was a lot of preamble for what is Luna. So, made by Game Arts, this is what apparently put the Mega CD on the map in Japan, and then was localized by Working Designs over in America, which I'm not going to open the can of worms that is Working Designs. Do a Google and you'll learn all about them. But it is set on, if I can remember this correctly, it's set on a moon. It's kind of a fantasy setting. There's magic. And the first game starts with you playing as a boy called Alex, who dreams of becoming the legendary Dragon Master. And then starts the journey to go and find the 4 dragons to get the equipment so that you become the Dragon Master. But then obviously shenanigans happen, and other stuff happens. And I don't want to spoil the story because anyone who plays the game now can see how much of a special experience this is. And if you do want to play this, there was recently a remaster of the 2 games released for modern consoles and PC. It's called the Luna Remaster Collection, which I highly recommend you pick up, even though I've got the 2 Mega CD games, because it was because you can't buy them in PAL legally. Officially, I still bought the Remaster Collection to show my support for the series. So, Martin, you got fed up of me talking about Luna all the time. So, what was your thoughts on the series?
So I was aware of it quite a while ago, not quite back in the day in the 90s, because like I said, I was very RPG non-existent because just the circles I was in didn't have an awful lot of RPGs in them. So I'd heard of the series in the 2000s when I'd started discovering emulation, but my introduction was more via the follow-ups to the Luna games, which was Grandia, because I'd played Grandia 2 on the Dreamcast, and then a friend / colleague, a supermarket I worked at the time, actually loaned me Grandia 1 on the PlayStation. And I absolutely fell in love with those 2 games. They're some of my favorite RPGs. So I kept wanting to play Luna, but just never really got round to it. And while I had a lot more Mega CD experience back in the day than you yourself had, it was just because we didn't have a PAL release on a lot of these games, a lot of them sort of skipped me by. So I didn't get to play Luna until your absolutely fantastic work on Silver Star and Eternal Blue was already completed. And then I decided that I wanted to wind you up so much, I completed both of them before you finished the second one, or even started the second one. So I actually completed both of them at the beginning of the year. I did Silver Star, which I thought was a brilliant game. It had a few pacing issues here and there, and the difficulty was all up and down. But to be able to play it on a stock PAL Mega CD was an absolute thing of beauty, and I really, really fell in love with the characters and the world. And as I said, there were a few balance issues, like some of the characters were a little bit useless in combat. So, I think the remakes may have fixed that quite a lot. Some of the characters that didn't really get used got an awful lot more screen time and stuff like that. But then when I completed that, I was so invested. I basically started Eternal Blue that very night, straight afterwards. And the only way I can put it is I fell in love with Silver Star. I went beyond that with Eternal Blue. I thought it was one of the most amazing RPGs I'd played. Certainly wasn't going to hold up to a lot of my favorites that I'd played since then. But if I'd have played that back in 1995, I think it came out in the US, I'd have been absolutely blown away. You can see the improvements that Game Arts made in the animation. So they released Silver Star, which had a bit animation in it, but it was very static a lot of the time, with just maybe mouths moving or like a little hand wave and stuff like that. They then released a visual novel called Yumi Mix, which was basically a visual novel, which they'd obviously used that as a springboard to improve their animation skills massively. So when they then came back with Lunar Eternal Blue after that, the level of animation quality in it is fantastic. Like the characters move a lot more. It just feels like you're almost watching a full-blown cartoon from back in like the 80s or 90s at the time, which it blew me away. I can't sing its praises enough. And every character was useful. They all had their place in the story and all worked well in the combat. So they'd not only improved the animation, they'd also tightened up the gameplay and made everything just work perfectly in Eternal Blue. Like it's the perfect follow-up to Silver Star. Like I can't sing its praises enough, basically. So I know you obviously haven't really got around to playing it, but I'm sure you're looking forward to it massively, John.
Yes. So the reason why I haven't played it yet is because I generally don't play sequels immediately after, because I try to avoid like burnout, and also I don't want the games to kind of like get mushed together. I like to know that when I think of a game, I'm not actually thinking of like the sequel or the prequel. It's like, no, it's like firmly present in my mind. But also because I've been doing something called the 12 RPG challenge, which Martin has also been doing, and I started doing that last year, and the first game of last year was Silver Star, and the 12th game of this year, the last game of this year, will be Eternal Blue. So those are kind of like bookends to the 2 years of challenge. So, which is why I've waited so long to play it.
Yeah, no, I can certainly get behind that sentiment. To be honest with you, I'm very much when I like something, I want more of it, and I will.
Yeah,
just
no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll just chew through an entire series if I like it that much. So obviously, between both games being fantastic and your work bringing it to PAL consoles,
No mods required.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, as a little aside, there's been quite a lot of PAL conversions for Mega CD games, not just RPGs like Luna. And we now have over half of the library that was not available in PAL now playable in PAL. So if anyone ever wants a show where we can talk about that, you know where to find us. So obviously we've spoken about an awful lot of Sega games covering the Game Gear, the Master System, and the Mega CD. But I think it's about time we moved away from Sega for just a few minutes, of course.
Shock horror.
We don't want to be too far away from our beloved Sega, but we're going to jump over to Nintendo's Game Boy. To a couple of games that aren't really Final Fantasy games, but they were called Final Fantasy to try and assist sales in the West. And I've played all four in some capacity, but there was only one I really played back in the day, and I believe that was Final Fantasy Legend 2, which is actually a saga game. And these are more sort of like split. So there was four games. You had Final Fantasy Adventure, which was actually part of the Mana series, I believe.
The first one.
Yeah, it was the very first one, in fact. Yes, that's a good point. And then you had Final Fantasy Legends 1 to 3, which are actually from the Saga series. Now, all of those are now playable via the Mana and the Saga collections that have come out in more recent times. So they're definitely more available. But what was your first experience with them, John?
So it was there. Let me start again. Growing up on the Isle of Wight, there was a second-hand shop that I always loved to go to, and it's where I got a lot of, actually looking back, some of my most favorite games of all time, including, like, I'm looking at on the shelf, Streets of Rage 1 or 2 came from there. But whenever we went to, I would browse like the Game Boy section, and I remember picking up Final Fantasy Adventure, thinking I've heard of Final Fantasy and I've been wanting to give it a try, so it seemed perfect. So I took that, started playing it, and then didn't kind of realize at the time that, so Final Fantasy Adventure being like a mana game, it's real-time combat. It's not turn-based. You see enemies on the screen, you go up and you hit them. But I just got so invested into the story straight away. Like, it's probably very basic by modern standards. You're a slave, you'd be thrown into like a pit to fight, and then you defeat the monster and you escape, and then you go on a whirlwind adventure. But being a kid and having this kind of first experience with this type of game, it was just such like an eye-opening moment, and like the sense of adventure and to go and see all these different places and to actually make progress and not have to rely on someone else to like help. I was doing it all myself. There was one notable puzzle which, if anyone's played this game, will be aware of: Palm Trees and 8, or Palm Tree and 8. That is a puzzle that I could not figure out for the longest time. So I became very over leveled because I could not figure it out. So I would just go off and like do other stuff and like just kept getting more experience, like because I was fighting enemies for something to do, until I think I actually had to read online, which was there were 2 palm trees that you had to do a figure of 8 around to open up the next dungeon. There you go. If you're going to play this game, that's the solution to the puzzle. Palm Tree and 8, or Palm Trees and 8. But then I eventually also bought the 3 Legend games as well from the same shop. And I played all 3. At the time, I only beat Legend 3. And that, looking back, I thought was very fantastic. It had kind of like a sci-fi, like it moved, the first 2 were definitely fantasy, but that moved more into kind of like a sci-fi direction. The first game, I got to the final boss I could not beat, but I beat it during the 2020 lockdown, actually. And then the second game, I got partway through, but couldn't beat because it has a mechanic where if you put like equipment, like weapons or equipment onto certain characters and take them off, you lose half of the use, because if you have a sword or like a shield, you can only use them for a set amount of times before they run out. So I kept putting them on characters and take them off, and suddenly I was stuck in an area where I could not get past. But I went back to the game last year as part of doing this 12 RPG challenge, and I finally beat it. So yeah, and if anyone, Martin will talk about his experiences in a moment, but if anyone is interested by these, like we say, you've got the Mana and Saga collections, but within the last month, maybe 2 months, a fan has actually done color hacks of all 4 games, and they look fantastic. Like I'm partly tempted to go and replay Final Fantasy Adventure using the color hack. But Martin, what was your experience with them?
So as I said, I was loaned actually Final Fantasy Legend 2 by a friend. I didn't know about the series at all. I played Final Fantasy 7 at that point, so I knew of Final Fantasy, but I didn't know about the Legend games. And while it seemed like quite a basic RPG, I did like the sheer amount of characters you could be, like, because you had aliens, slimes, robots, and all this cool stuff that you could make your characters from, because you picked a party of 4. You picked what they were at the start, and then that was your party for the entire game. So you could make the game really easy or really hard for yourself by your choices at the start, if I remember rightly. And
replayability.
Yeah. So I got a fair chunk through it and just never really finished it, and then obviously gave the game back. And I didn't actually revisit them at all until more recently, when I actually found out about what they really were, as in not Final Fantasy games at all. And so I've gone along and actually played all 4 of them very briefly. I played Final Fantasy Adventure for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, and I tried out the 2 other Legends games just to see, what they were like, because I'd not got around to playing them. But as you mentioned, they've recently had DX color hacks, fan made. So I've got those on my Game Boy Everdrive to try out, because some of the other DX hacks that are doing the rounds are absolutely brilliant. My kids have really been enjoying Kirby's Dream Land DX, for example, going off topic slightly. But yeah, it just goes to show that the Game Boy really was a cracking little system. It had some real gems on it. And there are going to be people who are quite big fans of things like Shin Megami Tensei or Persona that may not realize that there were actually some side games, the Megami Tensei Last Bible games that were on the Game Boy. As well as other things like Legend of the River King, which was your favorite thing in the world there, John, fishing RPGs.
Bah.
And then obviously you had more commonly known ones like Pokemon and stuff like that. And there was also a Pokemon spin-off. Well, I say Pokemon spin-off, it was a knockoff more, for the Dragon Quest series called Dragon Quest Monsters, which was known as Dragon Warrior Monsters in the US. and that was on the Game Boy Color, I believe. So it just goes to show that there's quite a lot of different RPGs on the system, along with the more popular ones like Link's Awakening from Zelda series and Pokemon, and stuff like that. So again, it's a system where if you do a proper dive into it, you'll probably locate quite a lot of hidden gems. And that's what's so great about these old systems, because documentation was sparse and there was a lot of stuff not released. There's a lot of stuff left to discover. So, but have you played any other Game Boy RPGs at all, John?
Well, I mean, who hasn't played Pokemon? But I think that's such a popular series that I didn't really suggest it for this episode, because everyone and, you know, their grandmother and their grandchildren knows about Pokemon. Otherwise, played Zelda Link's Awakening. That might be my favorite Zelda game of all time. I just have so many happy memories playing that, both the original and the DX re-release they did for the Game Boy Color.
Yeah, both brilliant.
Otherwise, for the original Game Boy, I'm probably going to remember after we stop recording, but there's none that are coming to mind, because otherwise, if we're going to stick with like Game Boy, the ones that I love so much, and I know you do as well, is going to be jumping into the Game Boy Advance, which you then probably guess what I'm going to suggest.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd be going off on an hour recording just to talk about Golden Sun alone, to be perfectly honest with you. So
yes,
on the Game Boy Advance, but I think technically it's a 32-bit machine, so it's not in the purview of what we're talking about today.
Is the GBA a 32-bit system?
It's a 32-bit system, but it only has its stereo system is lesser than some of the 16-bit systems, so that's why some of the SNES conversions or whatever have. They look amazing, but they tend to not have quite as good sound. But I think technically the GBA is actually a 32-bit system.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, that's why it wasn't going to be in this purview. But hey, you know, we can come back to it at some point. But certainly other RPGs I'm aware of on the Game Boy would be there was a Lufia game as well. That was quite a
Game Boy Color
on the Game Boy Color. Yes. There was obviously remakes of Dragon Quest 1 and 2.
And 3.
So yeah, there's an awful lot if you put the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color together to discover. But I think we've been on Nintendo long enough. You know, 20 minutes is bringing me out in highs. I think the Sega's lawyers are going to come after me soon, so we'll swing it back around. So I think just to sort of top and tail this little chat, we'll talk about a couple of other random ones that you and I are both quite big fans of for the Mega Drive. So I thought we'd start off by talking about one you've already mentioned once or twice, which is what the Americans know as Beyond Oasis, but we in PAL regions know it by its Japanese name as well, The Story of Thor, which was an action RPG in a top-down style made by Ancient, Yuzo Koshiro's company, as you mentioned earlier. It did get a sequel on the Saturn as well, which was much in the same vein, but it's a very colourful game. It's not especially long, so it's quite approachable from that particular perspective. And unlike a lot of games, it was actually optimised for PAL regions. So the PAL version of it is running at proper speed, which is why on the Mega Drive Mini, unlike a lot of the other games where we just had the NTSC-U version included, we actually got the PAL version of Story of Thor put on the PAL Mini, which is a random little tidbit for everyone there. So that's something extra to throw in your little Sunday night pub quizzes or whatever. But what's your experience with the Story of Thor?
See, Story of Thor is one that I passed by so many times because I would see it on these different collections. It was on my Steam Mega Drive collection, and I'll see it included like with other re-releases, and I'm like, Story of Thor, whatever. But then randomly I decided to finally give it a try via a flash cartridge. So I started it, and then I really got into it, and I eventually did beat it. And then I enjoyed the game so much that I then went and actually bought a box copy. It hasn't got the manual, sadly, but that's because that's a bit expensive now. But yeah, I've now got a copy, and it's one I feel like this is a game that gets overlooked so much because I think it's like, oh yeah, that's on the Mega Drive or Genesis, but no, you should actually play this. It's a great game, and like I say, it's not too long, but it's really fun and really enjoyable and very colorful, and it's just something that people really should just give it a try. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it seems to follow a theme for some of the other games we've spoken about as well, like Monster World 4 and Defenders of Oasis, and that it's got a bit of an Arabian theme to it with like jinn, or genies as we call them over here, and stuff like that. So there definitely seems to be quite a few games in that vein, but I find the Mega Drive tends to have a lot more action RPG experiences rather than turn-based ones, which puts quite a lot of people off. But there's a lot of games with some really good depth in there. I mean, we've got things like Light Crusader by Treasure, which is like an isometric one that is pretty good. And the legend that is Yu Suzuki made an RPG with Sega called Sword of Vermilion, which a lot of people know and gets included on a lot of collections as well, which is quite a decent one. It's not, it's not going to be considered the best RPG of its generation, but it's certainly a very, very good one. Have you played either of those two games?
I tried Light Crusader via Steam and played it for about half an hour, but I didn't really gel with that one very well. But I haven't played the other one, though, I'm afraid. I mean, it's on the list to try, Sword of Vermilion. I do need to give that a go.
Yeah, like I said, it's definitely not going to breach your top 10 list by any stretch, but it's definitely a decent game, and with pedigree like Yu Suzuki on it, it's gonna have some good elements to it, especially some of the games he's put out like Outrun, etc. So definitely. But obviously, looking at the fact that Light Crusader was isometric brings us on to the next game that I wanted to talk about, and this is another one that has had artwork by the same person that did Shining Force, Yoshitaka Tamaki, and that game is Landstalker, which is, as I've said, it's an isometric action RPG where you play a hero by the name of Nigel, that very fantastical name there, who is followed around by his fairy Friday, and goes on a little bit of a dungeon diving quest to find a jewel of some kind, and it all just sort of develops from there. But again, it's got a lot of really, really nice artwork on it. I've not completed it, but I have got to the final dungeon and just never really got round to finishing it because it's quite a big dungeon with there's a lot of puzzles in this game. So you're going to spend a lot of time in a lot of dungeons trying to find the right route through. So it's quite a tough one until you either get used to it or you use a guide. But it is a fantastic game that I would certainly recommend to an awful lot of people. And I know you quite enjoy Landstalker, John. Is that right?
Actually, no, I'm afraid that's not one I've played. It's one that a mutual friend of ours has played as part of his 12 RPG challenge last year, but it is on the list for me to try because it's on the Mega Drive Mini 2, or was it on the first one? But
I believe it was on the first one, but it's on one of the two minis, and it does occasionally get included. I think it's on one of the Mega Drive collections, because this game was made by one half of the development studios that worked on the early Shining games. So you had two. You had Climax and another one, and they would go on to become Sonic Software Planning and Camelot, respectively. And Camelot are obviously a lot more well known for doing stuff like the Golden Sun series and the Mario sports series like tennis and football, which is all they seem to do nowadays, unfortunately. But Climax would go on to make a bunch of other games in the Stalker series, including the sequel to this on the SNES, which was the very unfortunately named Lady Stalker. Not called that because you actually stalked any ladies, but you played a person called Lady, and because it was in the Stalker series, you are Lady Stalker. So it's a completely not nasty title at all. It just has very bad connotations in the West. And they made a bunch of other games as well, which would culminate on the Dreamcast with a game called Time Stalkers over here, but Climax Landers in Japan. And it was like a crossover RPG in a similar vein to the Dark Clouds game, where you would sort of like build up a village and go through randomly generated dungeons. And it included characters from Shining in the Darkness, Landstalker, Lady Stalker, and an RPG series that were mostly on the SNES, but were also remade on the Saturn called Feder, the Emblem of Justice. So that's one to look into at some point, albeit it's not a very, very amazing game by any stretch, but it's not that bad. But yeah, certainly Landstalker as a game is definitely one I'd recommend. It's very, very tough because of the isometric viewpoint, especially with a lot of the jumping, because there's a lot of very tight bits with spikes and stuff like that. So it can get very infuriating because you'll hear Nigel die and go "Ooh," many, many times. It will get very annoying. But it is a lovely looking game, and I believe the soundtrack was also done by Motoaki Takenouchi, who I mentioned earlier did the Shining Force 2 soundtrack. So a couple of the songs on it will actually remind you of some of the Duel Master tunes. So quite a lot. So very, very good composer he was. So I think we've got one more game that we wanted to talk about before we wrap this up, and it's one you brought up and beforehand, and it's one that I've played quite a few times, albeit I've not got amazingly far on it. And that is Soleil, which was actually known as Ragnar Senti in Japan and Crusader of Senti in America. Now, my first encounter with this one was actually via, I believe, Sonic the Comic or Mean Machine Sega, where there was a little cutaway about the game where it showed a picture of the scene where Sonic is sat on a deck chair, sunning himself up in the game as like a little cameo. Because I think the article was about cameos of Sonic in other games. And that was the first encounter I ever had with it. And then I didn't get a chance to play it until I discovered emulation in about like 99, 2000. And I managed to get a chunk into it. And I really, really enjoyed it, but I never actually completed it. And now with the recent re-release on the Mini 2, I've had an occasion to take it up a couple more times, albeit, again, I've not really got very far. But it is actually a really, really good game. Again, it gets stigmatized as a Zelda clone because it very much feels like Link to the Past in a couple of ways, but it has a really interesting animal mechanic attached to it, which gives it quite a fair bit of uniqueness. What's your experience with Soleil?
So I didn't play it until I got my Mega Drive Mini 2, and it was the first game that I properly played from that. Because I remember hearing about it, and the game apparently used to be actually quite cheap in PAL territory, so much so that people who over in the US who wanted to play it were being told to import it because it was a lot cheaper than their version. But as a result, the game has now skyrocketed in price, which is a shame because I've now, having beaten the game, part of me actually would like to have it for the shelf, like Story of Thor. But I can see why I guess the comparison is made about being a Zelda clone, but with the animal mechanics and things like that, I feel it is like its own thing, and I think it's really enjoyable. If anything, I feel this probably is more like a quintet game, like the Quintet trilogy that was on the SNES. I feel like it's more in that vein than in, say, a proper Zelda vein. But, you know, people who say it probably would have had to have played the Quintet games to make that comparison.
Yeah, and just for our listeners, obviously we know what we mean by the Quintet trilogy, but do you want to say which games they are, or at least?
So, starting with Soul Blazer, which I played for the first time 3 years ago. Then we move on to Illusion of Gaia, or if you're in PAL, Illusion of Time, which I played for the first time this year. And then ending with Terranigma, which I haven't played yet, but will play.
Yeah, Terranigma, I believe, was a PAL exclusive after Japan, so it didn't actually come out in America. It was one of the very few SNES RPGs that did that, if I remember correctly. So a proper rarity there. There was an unofficial fourth game as well, which a subsection within Quintet completed on the PlayStation, which I completed as part of the RPG Challenge last year as my first game, and that was Grand Stream Saga. Which a lot of people will be familiar with from the PlayStation official magazine demo discs, where it had some of the animation cutscenes and a couple of like cut down levels. Well, it was a cut down level and a boss. I actually bought the game 20 odd years ago and got a fair way into it and never completed it. So that's why I took it up for the RPG Challenge last year. And was able to complete it, and it's actually not a terrible game by any stretch. It's certainly not going to win any awards, but it does at least have its place in RPG history as being the very first RPG to use fully 3D modeled environments, I believe, because obviously games like Final Fantasy VII and stuff like that use pre-rendered still, so it's still quite an important RPG from that perspective. But certainly with those 3 or 4 games, yeah, they are a lot more similar to Soleil. as you've said. So the other little tidbit I can share about Soleil is, unlike an awful lot of games that came from Japan, the PAL version actually released before the US. So while the US name, Crusader of Senti, is probably a much better translation, it came out in the West first as Soleil, so that's its proper name.
Also, because there were two different translations done. So it wasn't done by one team and put in both regions. It was two different, one for PAL and for the US. They're different translations.
Yes, there's a lot of games on Sega systems that do that, especially on the Saturn, where a lot of translations were done by working designers for America, but we tended to get Sega's in-house translators doing it, which is why some games, amusingly, like the Shining series with Shining Wisdom and Shining the Holy Ark, where we had a much more faithful translation, which actually tied it in with the rest of the series better, whereas the American ones didn't to a lot of extent, because Sega wouldn't allow them to use certain names in America for whatever reason, but they had no problem with doing it in PAL regions. Probably some sort of licensing issue, I'd have thought. It's also the reason why Story of Thor was called Story of Thor over here, because annoyingly, a character's name was changed in the West, whereas in Japan, that character was called Thor in the game. So the title actually references the story a lot more, known as the Story of Thor, rather than Beyond Oasis, which is just a very sort of generic Arabian-sounding title. So again, there's another little pub quiz tidbit to sort of wrap this up with. So yeah, we've covered quite an awful lot of 8 and 16-bit RPGs here from all across the world. Some absolute gems, some maybe not as good as others, but certainly a lot to think about and look into, and hopefully people to go on to enjoy. Have you got any more thoughts you want to share with us before we finish up, John?
Well, I think if I did, we'll probably be here for another half an hour, because there are more games that we could talk about. Some which I haven't even played, but I want to shout out. But I think that maybe that might have to be a different episode.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly got some other games that I wanted to go over as well, which I had here on some notes. But obviously, we don't want this to go on forever.
We're at an hour and a half.
We're at an hour and a half, and hopefully we may get asked to do another one where we can go over some of these games. We might be able to expand that scope to other consoles as well, not just the 8 and 16-bit ones. Because certainly we haven't looked at anything that was on the Famicom or NES or the PC Engine at all, which would technically fit in the realm of 8-bit. So certainly that's something we'll have to revisit, hopefully, in another recording. So this has been an absolutely fantastic chat, John. Thanks very much for coming along and helping me out with it. We've covered an awful lot of RPGs. Some I've not played, some you've not played. So we've even given ourselves something extra to try out. So it's been fantastic having you along. And thank you everyone for coming along and listening. And thank you also to Retro Reloaded for having us along for another Pixel panel. I've been Retro Martin, and with me has been
John, aka Xhojn, on Discord.
Excellent. And hopefully we'll see you again for another show.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, folks, that's game over for this episode of Retro Reloaded. Thanks for joining me on this retro adventure. If you loved today's trip down memory lane, then consider helping me keep the nostalgia alive by supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/retro reloaded. You'll get early episodes, bonus content, and a chance to pick the next game that we reload. Feel free to let me know your thoughts about the podcast, and until next time, keep those controllers charged.